Imagine being the sitting president of the United States, only to have your biggest night hijacked by the one man you thought you'd buried politically. That's exactly what happened when Donald Trump, the king of his own universe, watched a ghost from the past walk into his coronation and steal his crown without saying a single word. The ballroom lights of the Marriott Marquis shimmered off golden chandeliers, a galaxy of crystal suspended over an ocean of power. This wasn't just another Washington dinner. It was the annual gala for the American Housing Relief Foundation, and for President Donald Trump, it was his court. He sat at the head table, a modern monarch surveying a room built on the foundations he understood best: wealth, loyalty, and the delicious weight of his own authority. This was his element, the low hum of conversation, a symphony composed in his honor, the deferential nods from CEOs and the discreet flash of phone cameras from the spouses of senators. It was all fuel for the fire of his certainty. He was the sun, and every person in this gilded room was a planet held in his orbit, drawn by the undeniable gravity of his office. "Tremendous turnout, sir," Mark Delaney, his security chief, murmured beside him. Trump gave a satisfied grunt, his gaze sweeping the room with a sense of ownership. "They know who gets things done, Mark," he said, his voice a low rumble of confidence. "They're here for me, for results." Beside him, Ivanka was the picture of regal elegance, her poised smile the perfect accessory to his raw power. Everything was exactly as it should be. The night was a monument to his success, and his upcoming speech would be the final, triumphant inscription. He felt invincible, perched at the apex of his world, a world he had meticulously crafted in his own image. And then the universe tilted. A smooth, familiar baritone cut through the air, an announcement that landed with the force of a physical blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a special guest joining us this evening, the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama." It was like a jolt of pure electricity, and in that single, shocking moment, the king felt his throne begin to crumble beneath him. The name, Barack Obama, was not merely spoken, it was unleashed. For a silent, heart-stopping second, it hung in the crystalline air, a sonic boom before the shockwave hit. Then came the sound. It wasn't the polite, orchestrated applause of a political fundraiser. It was a raw, visceral roar, an involuntary explosion of pent-up energy that felt less like a welcome and more like a liberation. The entire room, a universe of tuxedos and silk, surged to its feet in a single, unified motion. It was a tidal wave of adulation, so sudden and total it felt as though the very laws of physics in the ballroom had been rewritten. One moment, Donald Trump was the sun, the undisputed center of this glittering cosmos. The next, he was in total eclipse, plunged into a cold, shocking darkness as every face, every body, every ounce of energy in the room turned away from him and toward the light that had just entered. Barack Obama glided through the doorway, not with the heavy tread of a rival, but with the effortless grace of a man entirely at peace with his own skin. He wore that familiar, calm half-smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the chaos he had just created, yet he remained serenely above it. He didn't stride, he drifted, one hand raised in a slow, easy wave that seemed to personally greet every cheering guest. At the head table, Trump felt the shift as a physical violation. The warm bath of adoration he had been soaking in was instantly drained away, leaving him exposed and shivering in the sudden chill of irrelevance. A low, guttural sound, something between a growl and a gasp, caught in his throat. "He's not supposed to be here." The thought was a frantic prayer against a reality that was unfolding with brutal clarity. He could feel the eyes of his donors, his allies, even his own family, being pulled away from him as if by an irresistible magnetic force. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, the words a spray of venom meant only for Mark Delaney. The security chief leaned in, his own stoic expression a mask over what must have been his own professional shock. "The board invited him, sir. Last minute. They cited visibility." Trump's hands clenched into fists beneath the table, the starched linen crinkling like foil. "Visibility?" he spat, the word tasting like acid. "He's hijacking my night. My donors, my city." Deep, septic wounds from a decade of political warfare tore open. He saw the laughing faces at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the night this man had mocked him on a national stage. He saw years of relentless effort to erase Obama's legacy, to brand him a failure, only to watch him reappear and, with a simple wave, reclaim the very reverence Trump craved more than anything. He watched, transfixed in horror, as a four-star general he'd appointed clasped Obama's shoulder with a warmth reserved for a true commander-in-chief. He saw senators abandoning their seats to intercept him, their faces beaming with an unguarded delight he had never received. This wasn't just an interruption. It was a public exorcism, and he was the demon being cast out. From his seat at the head table, Trump's world had shrunk to a single, infuriating focal point. The glittering chandeliers, the faces of his donors, the entire opulent ballroom, it all blurred into a hazy, indistinct backdrop. The only thing in sharp focus was Barack Obama, moving through the crowd not as an intruder, but as a returning hero. The applause was no longer just noise. It was a physical force, a relentless wave of sound that beat against Trump, eroding his composure, stripping him of his power. It was a living, breathing beast. And with every handshake Obama gave, it fed and grew stronger, its roar a personal indictment of Trump's reign. People held their phones aloft like digital torches, their faces glowing in the screens, a modern mob anointing their chosen champion. This was not a welcome. This was a coup. The slow, simmering rage in his gut reached a volcanic pressure, demanding release. This was more than a social slight. It was a public execution of his authority, carried out in his own palace, in front of his own court. He felt the foundation of his power, the carefully constructed aura of dominance and control, cracking beneath him. Ivanka, sensing the precipice, laid a gentle hand on his arm, a silent, desperate plea for the political calculus he seemed to be abandoning. "Dad, don't," her eyes begged. He shook her off with a barely perceptible twitch, a gesture of pure dismissal. Restraint was for losers. Restraint was a tactic used by the weak to survive. He was a king, and kings did not tolerate challenges to the throne. He beckoned Mark Delaney with a flick of his wrist, a summons that was both imperial and impatient. The security chief leaned in, his body a solid wall of muscle, his face a neutral mask. Trump's voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was far more dangerous. It was a low, guttural command, stripped of all artifice, honed to a razor's edge of pure will. "Get him out of here!" Delaney, a man who had faced down threats on every continent, a man for whom executing orders was as natural as breathing, went absolutely still. For one fractional second, the professional mask slipped, revealing a flicker of disbelief. He saw the chessboard not just for this move, but for the 10 catastrophic moves that would follow. He saw the headlines, the viral clips, the political shrapnel that would tear through the administration. "Sir?" he asked, his tone meticulously neutral, but the single word was freighted with a silent appeal. "Reconsider this madness." Trump's eyes, cold and hard as polished stone, locked onto his. "You heard me," he pressed, his voice dropping even lower, laced with a venomous finality. "This is my event. He is an uninvited guest, and he is disrupting it. He is trespassing on my stage. I am the President of the United States. He is not. I want him gone, now." Delaney's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing in a silent protest. "Mr. President," he began, his voice a low counter-rhythm to the applause, "to remove a former president in front of this crowd. The fallout would be—" "I don't care about fallout," Trump snapped, cutting him off with a vicious stab of his finger toward Obama. "Fallout is for other people. I care about respect. He is disrespecting the office by showing up here to steal my spotlight. Do it quietly, do it loudly, I don't give a damn. Just make it happen." The command was absolute, a declaration of war against decorum, against optics, against reason itself. The line had been irrevocably crossed. Resigned, Delaney straightened up, his face becoming a blank slate of grim professionalism. The advisor was gone, replaced by the enforcer. He turned and gave a subtle, almost invisible signal. Across the room, 2 men detached themselves from the shadows along the wall. They were instruments of his will, 2 silent predators now moving through the glittering crowd, their path converging on the one man who had, in less than 5 minutes, brought a king to his knees. The two agents moved with a chilling, unnatural precision. They were like scalpels in a room designed for butter knives, their dark suits slicing through the glittering crowd. They didn't push or shove, they didn't have to. An invisible wave of cold authority parted the guests for them, a ripple of unease turning whispers to silence as they advanced. Their target was unmistakable, and the entire ballroom held its breath, watching the inexorable approach. Obama saw them long before they arrived. He didn't tense or show alarm. He simply paused his conversation, his expression shifting from warm engagement to a focused, analytical calm. It was the look of a man who understood the board and could see the opponent's move 3 steps ahead. He waited, a rock of stillness in a suddenly turbulent sea, as the two men came to a halt before him. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the sudden quiet. "Everything all right?" The lead agent, a man with a jaw so tight it looked like it might crack, swallowed hard. The practiced neutrality of a security professional was failing him, his eyes darting nervously around the silent, watchful room. He cleared his throat and the words came out stiff and unnatural, as if they had been forced into his mouth. "Mr. President, we've been asked to escort you out." The words didn't land like a dropped glass. They hit the room like a physical blow. A collective, audible gasp swept across the tables. Forks clattered onto plates. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated shock, a scene so far beyond the pale of political norms that it felt surreal. The sitting president of the United States was using his security detail to have his predecessor physically removed from a charity gala. It was a raw, naked display of power so crude it bordered on the dictatorial. Obama didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He held the agent's gaze for a long moment, then let his eyes drift across the room, locking onto Trump at the head table. The president sat bolt upright, his face a mask of grim expectation, waiting for the public humiliation to be completed. In that silent, charged glance, 1,000 words were exchanged. It was a duel of wills fought across 100 feet of marble floor, a direct challenge from Obama. Are you truly this small? Are you prepared to follow this through? Before the agents could act, a new figure entered the fray. Linda Ortega, the foundation's director, rushed forward, gripping the host's microphone like a weapon. Her voice, trembling at first, found a core of steel. "Excuse me," she announced, her amplified voice cutting through the suffocating tension. Her eyes flashed, first at the agents, then defiantly toward Trump. "Mr. Obama is an honored guest of this foundation. He was invited by the board. I personally asked him to be here." Her declaration was a shield, a public line drawn in the sand. A wave of relieved, then defiant applause broke the silence. Obama offered her a small, grateful nod before turning back to the agents with a hint of wry amusement. "Sounds like I'm in the right place," he said smoothly. At the head table, Trump's control finally shattered. He slammed his open palm on the table, the sharp crack making glasses jump and silverware rattle. "This is my event," he boomed, his voice raw and furious, exploding through the ballroom speakers. "I am the President of the United States, and I am telling you, get him out!" The room went dead. This was no longer politics. It was a tantrum, a volcanic eruption of ego that shocked the room into horrified silence. In that moment, Linda Ortega made the final move. She turned her back on Trump, faced Obama, and extended the microphone. "Mr. President," she said, her voice now clear and resonant, "we would be honored if you would say a few words." It wasn't just an invitation. It was a gavel strike, a final judgment in the court of public opinion. Linda Ortega's invitation was a spark thrown into a powder keg. The applause that erupted was not just applause. It was a revolution. It was a thunderous, defiant roar from a crowd that had collectively chosen its side. Every clap was a ballot cast against the brutishness they had just witnessed, a vote for the grace that now stood before them. The sound hammered the head table, a physical manifestation of Trump's catastrophic miscalculation. He sat frozen, a king in a court that had just mutinied, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and impotent rage. Ivanka's frantic whispers, "Dad, just let it go, the cameras are on you," were nothing but a faint, buzzing noise, lost in the hurricane of his own fury and the deafening roar of the crowd. Yet Obama did not rush to the podium to claim his spoils. He understood that the loudest statement is often made in silence. In a breathtaking display of political instinct, he held back, deliberately slowing the moment down. He turned and offered a quiet, reassuring word to the visibly shaken host. He adjusted his cufflink. He took a sip of water. Then he began to move toward the stage, not with the triumphant stride of a victor, but with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who knew he had all the time in the world. He stopped to shake another hand, to share a brief, knowing look with the senator. Each step was a form of psychological warfare, a masterful stretching of the suspense that tightened the invisible leash around the room's attention. He was forcing Trump and everyone else to wait. He was demonstrating, without saying a word, who was truly in control. When he finally arrived at the podium, he didn't launch into a fiery speech. He simply stood there. He rested his hands lightly on the polished wood, his posture relaxed, and he let the silence work for him. He scanned the room, making eye contact, letting the last "oh" of the applause die down until the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. The quiet he commanded was more profound, more absolute than the noise Trump had tried to generate. It was a vacuum that pulled every ounce of focus in the room toward him, leaving Trump marooned in a silent, isolated corner. Then he smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph or condescension. It was a small, almost self-deprecating smile that instantly broke the tension, inviting the entire audience to share in the absurdity of the moment. "Well," he began, his voice a calm, conversational melody that felt like a cool cloth on a fevered brow after Trump's jarring outburst. "I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I just came here to support this incredible cause." A wave of appreciative laughter rippled through the room. He had masterfully reframed the confrontation, not as a hostile takeover, but as a slightly awkward, unforeseen turn of events. "But," he continued, a subtle, knowing twinkle in his eye, "since I've been given the microphone—" The laughter grew louder, warmer, a sound of pure relief. With a few simple, disarming words, he had taken all the venom out of the air. He had not only won the standoff, he had erased it, replacing the raw tension with a shared sense of amusement and unity. He had changed the entire emotional landscape of the night, and Trump could only sit and watch, a powerless spectator at his own public dismantling. "This night," Obama began, his voice dropping into a more intimate register, a subtle shift that compelled the audience to lean in, "isn't about me. It's not about politics. It's not about any of the history between anyone in this room." With those first few sentences, he performed a masterful act of political alchemy. He took the toxic, ego-driven conflict that Trump had ignited and declared it irrelevant. He was clearing the stage, sweeping away the wreckage of the personal battle to make room for something far more important. His gaze moved deliberately across the ballroom, from the powerful donors in the front to the young volunteers in the back, creating a sense of shared purpose that transcended the room's rigid hierarchy. "It's about families," he continued, the words landing with a quiet, profound weight. "Families in Cleveland, in Phoenix, in Tulsa, who are lying awake tonight staring at a stained ceiling, wondering if it's the last one they'll see before an eviction notice appears on their door." The room, which moments before had been a political tinderbox, grew utterly still. He wasn't giving a speech. He was bearing witness. He was taking the abstract, sanitized concept of housing relief and giving it a human face, a beating heart. "It's about the single mother I met in Dayton," he said, his voice imbued with the memory of the encounter. "A woman working 2 jobs, who still had to explain to her 7-year-old daughter why their minivan was now their bedroom. A daughter who told me she did her homework at a 24-hour laundromat because it was the only place with enough light and warmth." You could feel the atmosphere in the room change. The tension of the political showdown was replaced by a heavier, more somber emotion: empathy. The vivid, heartbreaking imagery cut through the layers of wealth and power, reminding everyone in that gilded hall of the raw, human stakes. Linda Ortega stood near the stage, her hands clasped over her heart, relief and gratitude washing over her face. He wasn't just saving her event, he was sanctifying it. Even Trump, fuming at his table, seemed momentarily silenced, his whispered complaint to Delaney, "It's a sob story," sounding hollow and weak against the powerful current of genuine emotion Obama had unleashed. Then, Obama brought the focus back to himself, but in a way that was devoid of ego. "I have been fortunate in my life," he said, his tone one of quiet, humble reflection. "I've been given opportunities that most people never see. And with that good fortune comes a profound, undeniable responsibility to give back." He let that statement hang in the air, a gentle but firm challenge to every person of means in the room. "So tonight," he announced, his voice ringing with a clear, unwavering conviction, "I will be making a personal donation of $1 million to the American Housing Relief Foundation." The announcement was a detonation. A collective gasp was instantly swallowed by a tidal wave of thunderous applause. For the second time that night, the room surged to its feet. But this was different. It wasn't just admiration for a celebrity or a political figure. It was a visceral, emotional response to an act of true leadership. He hadn't just spoken about the cause, he had embodied it. With one sentence, he had set a new standard for the evening, transforming himself from a surprise guest into the night's moral and financial center of gravity. The applause for Obama's $1 million pledge was a judgment. It was a deafening, rolling wave of sound that crashed over the head table, a sonic force that seemed to physically pin Trump to his chair. This was no longer just a contest for attention. It was a public trial, and the verdict was being delivered by the very people Trump considered his own. The standing ovation was a direct, humiliating repudiation of his behavior, a clear choice for the quiet dignity of his rival over his own belligerent ego. The cameras, acting as unforgiving arbiters of history, zoomed in, capturing every damning detail. Trump's face, a rigid mask of fury, his body, stiff with a resistance that only made him look smaller, his refusal to join the applause, a petulant act of defiance that read as pure weakness. Ivanka's frantic whisper, "Dad, for God's sake, just clap," was a plea not just for him to save face, but to salvage a shred of the authority he was hemorrhaging with every passing second. He ignored her, his stillness a monument to his own stubborn pride. He watched, his vision blurring with rage, as donors, men who had golfed at his clubs and attended his fundraisers, gestured wildly for staff, their checkbooks open. He could almost hear the numbers being whispered, pledges doubling and tripling in the wake of Obama's challenge. It was a heist, a brazen theft of his spotlight, his donors, and his night, all happening in slow, excruciating motion. As the ovation finally began to ebb, he saw a sliver of an opening. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass to reclaim a game that was already lost. He grabbed a silver fork and tapped it sharply against his water glass, the metallic clang a desperate plea for relevance. He pushed himself to his feet, a forced, predatory smile plastered on his face. "A wonderful night," he boomed into the microphone, his voice straining to project a jovial, authority he no longer possessed. "A tremendous, tremendous success for a great cause." The room quieted, but it was the wary, awkward silence of an audience bracing for more unpleasantness. "And we've heard from Barack," he continued, his tone dripping with a condescension that was both transparent and pathetic. "Very nice words, very generous. But let me tell you, you don't fix homelessness with a check and a speech. You fix it with a strong economy, with results, the kind of results my administration is delivering every single day." The attack was meant to be a show of strength, a way to reframe the narrative around his own perceived accomplishments. But it landed with a thud, feeling cheap and graceless in the wake of Obama's unifying message. A few scattered, half-hearted claps sputtered and died. Then a voice, calm and clear, cut through the uncomfortable silence. It was Douglas Keene, the Republican donor. He didn't stand, but his words carried the weight of his reputation. "With all due respect, Mr. President," Keene stated, his gaze level, "his check just convinced me to turn my $100,000 pledge into $500,000. That's not a speech. That's leadership by example." The words were a dagger, and the room twisted it. A murmur of agreement swelled into a wave of applause, this time for Keene. It was a public mutiny, a rebuke delivered from within his own ranks. Trump's face burned a deep, furious crimson. The mask of control shattered into a million pieces. "You're all missing the point," he snarled into the microphone, his voice raw and cracking. "This is my night, and no one comes in here and steals it from me." The silence that followed was absolute, the deafening sound of a king screaming into the void. As the last echoes of Trump's furious outburst died in the horrified silence, Obama made his move. He rose from his chair, not with the abrupt, jarring motion of his counterpart, but with a slow, deliberate grace that immediately recaptured the room's entire focus. He didn't stride to the stage or grab a microphone. He simply stood by his table, a figure of calm authority in a room still reeling from the chaos. He didn't look at the cheering crowd. He looked directly at Trump, his expression not of anger or triumph, but of a weary, profound disappointment. "Mr. President," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying across the ballroom with an almost supernatural clarity. "With all due respect, no one is stealing anything. We are here to raise money for families who are sleeping in their cars tonight. That is bigger than you. It is bigger than me. It is bigger than politics." The statement was a masterpiece of rhetorical jujitsu. With a few simple, undeniable truths, he had taken all the kinetic energy of Trump's rage and turned it back on him, exposing it as petty and self-serving. The room didn't just applaud, it erupted. The sound was a roar of catharsis, a collective endorsement of dignity over drama. It was a standing ovation that felt like a final, definitive judgment. Trump stood at the podium, momentarily stunned into silence, a general watching his last line of defense crumble into dust. But Obama knew the battle wasn't truly over until the entire purpose of the night was redefined. He had to pivot from dismantling his opponent to uniting the room behind a cause so compelling that the preceding conflict would be remembered as nothing more than a bizarre footnote. He held up a hand, and the roaring applause instantly subsided, the crowd eagerly awaiting his next words. "Words are good," he began, his tone shifting from firm rebuttal to soaring inspiration. "Vision is good, but action is what puts a key in a veteran's hand. Action is what gives a child a safe place to dream." He let the words resonate, priming the audience for what was to come. "That's why tonight," he announced, his voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, "in addition to my earlier pledge, I will personally match every single donation made in this room, dollar for dollar, up to $5 million. For one stunned, silent beat, the room processed the staggering generosity of the offer. $5 million. Then, the ballroom detonated. The sound was a physical shockwave of pure, unadulterated joy and disbelief. It was chaos, but a beautiful, philanthropic chaos. People were on their feet, shouting, cheering, whistling. Donors who had already pledged were waving down staff with a frantic urgency, screaming numbers across the room. "Double mine to 200,000! Make it $1 million! He's matching! Put us down for 2! The foundation's staff, utterly overwhelmed, scrambled through the aisles, their pledge cards filling up with figures that had seemed impossible just an hour earlier. At the head table, Trump's face went slack, his jaw slightly ajar. He was watching a man he tried to have thrown out single-handedly conduct a symphony of giving that would shatter every record the foundation had ever set. It was no longer a fight. It was a flawlessly executed checkmate, leaving the king not only captured, but completely irrelevant to the rest of the game. The air in the ballroom was no longer just electric. It was transcendent. The raw, partisan tension had been completely transmuted into a powerful, unified current of philanthropic fervor. It was a room transformed, a space that had been on the brink of a political brawl now pulsating with the joyful, chaotic energy of a record-shattering telethon. The final conflict of the night was not between two presidents, but between donors playfully shouting larger and larger pledges across their tables, competing in a sudden, exhilarating race of generosity. Finally, a visibly emotional Linda Ortega returned to the podium. She clutched a sheet of paper that trembled in her hands, her face a canvas of disbelief and tearful gratitude. A hush fell over the room, the giddy exhaustion giving way to a final, breathless anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice cracking, "in all my years with this foundation, I have never witnessed a night like this." She took a deep, steadying breath, her eyes sweeping over the sea of expectant faces. "Our goal for tonight, our most ambitious dream-out-loud goal, was $5 million. She paused, letting the memory of that now paltry figure hang in the air. "As of this moment," she continued, her voice rising with joyous disbelief. "Thanks to your incredible hearts and the unprecedented matching pledge from President Obama, the final tally raised tonight is $15.6 million. The number landed like a meteor. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, and then the ballroom exploded in a final, deafening roar of collective triumph. Chairs scraped back as everyone, CEOs, politicians, volunteers, leapt to their feet. It was a sound beyond mere applause. It was a celebration of what they had accomplished together, a testament to the power of a single moment of true leadership to inspire greatness. Porters were already sprinting from the press section, shouting the historic figure into their phones. On stage, Linda mouthed thank you to the room, tears now streaming freely down her face. Obama, seated once more, simply nodded, a quiet, satisfied smile playing on his lips. He didn't stand. He didn't take a bow. He had made his point, and now he allowed the moment to belong to the cause and the people who had risen to its challenge. But for Trump, the sound was an agony. It was the deafening roar of his own failure, the triumphant cheer for his own public dethroning. The $15.6 million was not just a number, it was the final, indelible score of his humiliation. Every cheer for Obama was a jeer for him. He could not endure it. In a sudden, violent movement, he shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the marble floor in a sound of pure, grating fury. He turned and stormed from the ballroom. He didn't look at Ivanka, whose face was a mask of weary resignation. He didn't signal to Delaney. He simply fled, a king abdicating his throne in the middle of his own feast. A chaotic flurry of camera flashes chased him like angry hornets, capturing his ignominious retreat for posterity. "Mr. President, a comment?" Reporters shouted into the void he left behind. His only answer was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. And the most devastating part? Inside the ballroom, the celebration barely registered his absence. The joyous noise, the hugs, the triumphant chatter, it all continued, unabated. It was as if a small, unpleasant stain had been wiped clean, allowing the brilliant tapestry of the evening to shine even brighter. The king was gone, but the kingdom was rejoicing too loudly to notice or to care. Long after the last champagne flute was cleared and the golden ballroom stood empty and silent, the story of that night was already hardening into legend. It echoed in the frantic keystrokes of reporters filing their stories from the hotel lobby and in the hushed, awestruck conversations of the staff cleaning up the remnants of the historic event. By dawn, it was no longer just a Washington story. It was a global parable. The split-screen images were everywhere, a stark visual thesis on the nature of power. On one side, Trump, his face a contorted mask of rage, jabbing his finger at an enemy only he could see. On the other, Obama, serene and centered, a small, knowing smile on his lips. The images were so fundamentally revealing that they transcended politics, speaking a universal language about two opposing ways of facing the world. One that meets pressure with aggression, and one that meets it with grace. The $15.6 million was the headline, but it was not the heart of the story. The heart was a masterclass in leadership, delivered not in a lecture hall, but in the white-hot crucible of a public confrontation. It was a profound demonstration that true strength is not found in the volume of one's voice, but in the quiet, unshakable steadiness of one's character. He never once mentioned Trump by name. Senator Julia Reinhart was quoted as saying in a dozen articles the next morning. He didn't have to. He just changed the subject to something that mattered more. He beat him by refusing to fight on his terms. That was the essence of the victory. Trump had stormed into the arena ready for a gladiatorial brawl, armed with fury and indignation. Obama entered the same arena, and instead of picking up a sword, he began to conduct a symphony. One man sought to dominate the room through intimidation, the other transformed it through inspiration. The lesson for anyone watching, from heads of state to high school students, was both simple and profound. In the defining moments of pressure, when the world is watching and egos are on the line, character is not forged, it is revealed. Leadership, the night taught us, is not about the relentless pursuit of the spotlight. It is the wisdom to know when to shine it on others. on a cause, on a shared purpose, on the humanity that connects us all. Obama did not steal the night. He rescued it. He elevated it from a petty political spectacle into a powerful testament to compassion. By focusing on the families who would never set foot in a room like that, he reminded a hall full of the world's most powerful people that their ultimate legacy would not be written in stock portfolios or election results, but in the quiet, positive impact they had on the lives of others. And in doing so, he won more than a news cycle. He won the timeless argument that even in an age of performative outrage and relentless conflict, dignity remains the most powerful and resonant voice in any room.